Okay, we're streaming to YouTube. Setting you up as the host. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Michael from Blue Sky Bio, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar presentation. While everybody is joining, a few comments. We've pushed out our new version of BlueSkyPlan, version 4.11, so you probably already received, or you're going to be receiving the next day or two, a prompt in your BlueSkyPlan software to go ahead to upgrade to the latest version of BlueSkyPlan. We did make some changes to the licensing functionality. You're able to share licenses between multiple computers, for example. So if you have any issues regarding licensing, check blueskyplan.com/license, or contact us if you have any issues at plan@blueskybio.com. Today, we're going to be continuing with our 2023 webinar series. All the information regarding past webinar presentations and upcoming webinar presentations could be seen at blueskybio.university/webinars. If you've missed any of our past presentations, such as my recent presentation on artificial intelligence in dentistry, or Dr. Baron Gruther's presentation on clinical orthodontics in BlueSkyPlan, or Dr. Russell Schaefer's presentation on 3D printed immediate dentures, and others, just go to our website. You can watch the recording. It's also available on YouTube, and you could see the past presentations, and of course, register for future presentations as well. All webinars are being presented free, and 1 CE credit is being awarded to anybody who is attending live. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A chat box, and we'll try to have them addressed during the presentation. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Cory Glenn. He's going to be presenting on the topic of improving implant treatment planning and surgical guide manufacturing using BlueSkyPlan's completely automated bone segmentation. So just a word, this is functionality that's not yet released. We have the completely automatic CT tooth segmentation already released, and the bone segmentation is going to be coming soon, and we'll see applications of that in today's presentation. Cory is a person that I don't think needs much introduction at all. There's a very long list of credentials, but in short, he's an international speaker, educator, visionary, digital dentistry wizard. Really, there's so many different terms and words that could be used to describe him. He's the master, he's the go-to guy for all things in digital dentistry. If you haven't yet checked out his YouTube channel or his website or his upcoming live courses, you should definitely do yourself a favor right after the presentation. Spend some time Googling him, take a look at. He has a tremendous amount of free educational information available on the web. And of course, nothing replaces going to his live courses as well. So check those out immediately after today's presentation. Cory, do you want to share your screen and go ahead?
All right, let's see. All right, you seeing it?
Yep.
Great. Okay, well, I'll just jump right in, and I'm going to try to see if I can actually do one of these webinars in less than 2 hours, because usually I'm scheduled for like an hour and I go like 3. So we'll see how that goes. But thanks for the kind introduction. Didn't know I had so many descriptions. You know, my wife, if you asked her, she would have a long list of other describing terms, and none of them would be the ones you used. But anyway, so we're going to be talking about basically how to utilize some of the new functionality that's going to be coming. As Michael mentioned, this is not a publicly available release yet, but it will be very soon. As he mentioned, we do already have the tooth segmentation, but if you're making a lot of complex surgical guides, especially bone supported guides for full arches, the bone segmentation, which I'll be demoing, is going to be a huge benefit to you, because, you know, if you've done traditional segmentation in the past, I know I've got a bunch of videos on it, how I would do it manually. And, you know, if you were doing a maxilla, it would take you, gosh, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour just to do the bone segmentation. So it was a huge time sink. And having taught this for years now, I know that that's always been one of the biggest barriers to people actually getting into this. And so to have the ability now to do it with the machine learning and just basically punch a button and it does your segmentation. I mean, I can't overstate how big of a benefit that is. So thought I'd just start right away by just showing you this. So this is a time lapse. I think I've got a clock running in the bottom, but here I'm loading the project. You can see the CT coming in here. And this is the volume that we need to do the segmentation. So we're going to actually do the bone segmentation of both jaws as well as the teeth. So if you'll notice, I've gone to the model master panel and I've just clicked on automatic jaw segmentation. And so what's going to happen is it's going to run the tooth segmentation first. It'll get all the teeth segmented. And now you see it's switched over. It's running the maxilla segmentation. And overall, this takes, I would say, anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes per jaw. And so this is one of the things I really like about this. And I'm going to pause this just a second while I talk about that. That went so quickly because I didn't have to edit it. But, you know, I've used numerous AI segmentation softwares in the past. You know, one of the downsides to them, while they're awesome, one of the downsides is that you just kind of get what you get. And so there's occasions where it might miss a chunk of bone and you don't really have the opportunity to edit it. If you noticed, let's see if I can just go back just a bit to right here. When it finishes, for example, the maxillary segmentation in BlueSkyPlan, you're actually going to get an opportunity to scroll through it and make any edits that you would like to. So, you know, if there was a piece of scatter that it segmented and you think, well, that's not really bone or tooth, you can erase that. You'll still have all of those manual tools that you traditionally have in the segmentation menu over on your right-hand side. And so it's going to give you that opportunity to edit your segmentation. So watch this, it's going to go by quick because I didn't really make any edits. But you see how now I can scroll up and down, I can see if there's anything missing. And if there was, I can actually go in, color that in or erase it. And then it will let you proceed to the next jaw. So now it's running the mandibular segmentation. And you'll see that now, again, I have the opportunity to edit and I'm looking through, does it need anything? In this particular case, this patient had really no restorations and, you know, I didn't have to edit either jaw. So I'm scrolling up and down here. Hopefully you can see that model outline. You can see the tooth root outlines here and it really just nailed it. So that's such a huge benefit. And I know you couldn't see the timer very well running underneath that, but that entire segmentation was about 3.5 minutes. So really a big game changer. There's no exporting it out to an outside program and then downloading things. Again, you get the chance to edit. It's such a huge benefit if you are doing any kind of bone supported guides. And again,
Cory, can I just interrupt for a second?
Go for it. Yep.
I just want to comment, because this functionality, NRCT automatic tooth segmentation functionality is AI driven, is based on machine learning, that if you do encounter a case where the segmentation didn't work perfectly, you'll be doing the entire digital dental community a service if you send us the case, because then we could then feed the cases back into the system learns from those cases, and it continues to improve over time. So as good as I hope it is when we release it, as I expect it is when we release it, if you send us those cases, we could keep fine-tuning and fine-tuning and fine-tuning and really just optimizing the heck out of the functionality.
Yeah, great point. And that really goes for anything within Blue Sky, not just the machine learning, but anytime you run into cases where something is just not working ideally, send it to Michael and the team and let them troubleshoot that, because that's how improvements do get made in Blue Sky. But especially with any of this machine learning stuff, you know, the dream is to one day, if you have a PFM crown on every tooth, that the AI has potentially been fed so many cases where that has been corrected and it sees the errors of where it's maybe segmenting scatter as opposed to actual tooth, that it will learn so much over time that it might give you an excellent segmentation where the scatter is almost not even an issue. So yeah, definitely an important point to submit those cases if you do run into problems. And by the way, if anyone has any questions throughout this, just type the questions into the Q&A box and Michael will stop me periodically and ask those. and we'll try to get you answered. All right, so that's the segmentation. You saw 3.5 minutes to do the maxilla, the mandible, and all the mandibular teeth. She didn't have any maxillary teeth, so we didn't have to do anything. But once you have that, everything is in your BlueSkyPlan file. You've now got the roots that you can turn on and off individually. You've got the maxilla and the mandible, which have accurate sockets of where the extractions are going to be. So now you can just jump straight into designing guides or doing whatever it is that you're doing in that case. So I grabbed just a handful of random cases where I've used segmentation in different capacities. And so this was kind of an interesting case. I was helping out Dr. Aaron Carmine, who's a local dentist friend here that I've been kind of helping learn implantology and everything. So he had this case, and the situation is that number 8 and number 9 have got resorption. And so those two teeth are needing to be extracted. And of course, we're going to place an implant, for the long term. But the challenge in this case is really the temporization. Like, how do you temporize this case? Because if you lose 8 and 9, are you going to do a bridge between the number 7 implant and the number 10 natural tooth? That's going to require prepping a virgin tooth and destroying an implant crown. Do you do a 2-tooth Maryland bridge? A 2-tooth like cantilever bridge off of number 10? That's not a great option. Do you do an Essex appliance, which dentists like because they're quick and easy to make, but they're universally despised by patients? None of those sounded like a great option. So as we go through this case, kind of bear in mind that that's one of the questions that we'll need to tackle, is how we can go about temporizing this. Okay, so we went ahead and did the implant planning. So you can see the trajectory of the implant there based on the existing root. We're going more palatal with it. We're in a bulk of bone. You can see where the emergence profile is on that. It's coming right through the incisal edge, which is perfect for a custom abutment. And long term, the goal is going to be to do a bridge between just one implant in the number 9 site and the existing implant in the number 7 site. And granted, if you're comfortable with immediate loading, then maybe that's how you temporize this. And that's a relatively easy solution, just a temp bridge between the two. But this being early on in Aaron's implant career, we didn't really feel comfortable jumping straight to that. So that's why we're going to have to explore these other temporization options. So one of the things I use this segmentation for a lot is if I have an intraoral scan of a patient and I know I'm going to be doing an immediate implant, well, how do I get rid of that tooth? I could go into Mesh Mixer and I could select it all. I could do, delete that, close the holes and everything. That's one option. You could also potentially use the cut tool in BlueSkyPlan, and that works, but it's not as refined of a tool. It's going to cut indefinitely anything that's behind it. And so a really simple way that I'll do this oftentimes is if I've got my intraoral scan with all the teeth there and it's stitched up, and then I've done the bone and the teeth segmentation, I'll just quickly do a Boolean subtraction of that particular tooth that needs extraction from my intraoral scan. And so if you're looking down here on the bottom right of my image, that's what you're seeing. I just did Boolean subtraction of the root that BlueSky segmented from my intraoral scan, and that gives me this accurate extraction model that now I can do my treatment planning on. And it's very useful because now you're not guessing at exactly where the contours of that socket are. So like in this case, I'm going to be designing a restoration and I want to train that tissue. Well, now I can actually know where the real socket is and develop ovate ponic forms in there so that we really maintain the gingival architecture. So I've got some video of doing that here shortly. So in this case, we went ahead and we virtually extracted that tooth. And with that tooth gone, now we could make a surgical guide, just a basic surgical guide like you would normally do. Here you see that printed. Another thing I love to use the segmentation for is just to print accurate study models. Any kind of a case, I know this is a relatively easy case, but any kind of a complex case, especially full arches, 100% of the time, I'm going to print the jaw so that you can actually run through and kind of do a mock surgery on the models. Because there's a lot of value in doing that, where you can get a feel for how your guides fit on the bone, if there's a particular path of draw you need to go in, things you might need to be aware of during the procedure. It just really helps to have those accurate models. Okay, so here is, excuse me, here is a quick time-lapse video showing some of that process. All right, so we've gone to Model Master. We're going to choose Automatic Jaw Segmentation, and now we start the segmentation. So again, this is time-lapsed. You can see the real time here in the bottom right. And right now it's doing the teeth. And just while this is running, one thing I have noticed is that this will be faster or slower depending on how many programs you have open. Like in this case, while I was doing this, I was doing screen recording. I had multiple big PowerPoints open that were hogging a lot of memory. So that will affect your, you know, how fast the segmentation runs. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Video paused for some reason, but that will affect how quickly all of this runs. So you're seeing it took about a minute to do all of the roots, and now it's going to start the maxillary segmentation. And if I'm not mistaken, this one I actually did do a small amount of editing, and you'll notice where the editing needs to happen. It's typically going to be around restorations where you've got scatter, because again, we're new enough in this process that you just can't see the bone through that scatter really well. And so just a quick tip, as you begin to use this, when you get to that editing step, pay particular attention to the areas where there's metal restorations or implants or things like that. All right, so it was about 3 minutes to finish the segmentation, and here you see it's around this implant. And so all I've had to do is use the brush tool, and I'm going to go in and just brush in a couple little spots that it missed. But man, this beats the heck out of having to just start from ground zero and do this for the entire maxilla. And then gosh, if you were doing each individual tooth, I mean, that you're talking hours of manual segmentation to do that. So this only took me about an additional minute to do whatever editing I needed to. And I'm just kind of scrolling through the volume, and then I click create a surface and finish, and now you see what I've got here. Now going back again, your segmentation on teeth that have restorations on it, you're going to notice that the scatter makes it not do the crown entirely right. However, usually it's going to get the root perfectly correct because the root's down below the level of that scatter. So since we are doing an immediate implant here, you can see I'm taking my intraoral scan, and I'm going ahead and just cutting out the majority of that crown. There we go. And now you've got a model that you could begin building a guide on. And then if you want the anatomically correct model with the perfect socket form, you could actually just Boolean subtract that root from the intraoral scan. All right, so here's my guide. We're putting in a couple of windows just to verify seating. And now we're fabricating the guide. And there's our surgical guide. So you could export that, print it, you'd be ready for surgery. And now what I'm doing is I'm closing the model. So I've gone into the model master, and under model editing, I'm just telling it to create a closed model so that I've got a base. All right, here's the resulting model you see right there. And now I'm going to go into the crown and bridge module, because crown and bridge module is where we actually have the Boolean functions. So a lot of people are unaware that you can do Boolean functions in BlueSky, but what I'm doing here is I'm going to extract the tooth number 9 from this model. Okay, and there you see it happens really fast. And here is now my accurate model that represents the socket form that's going to exist. And we can export that. That can be printed. And now if you even wanted to create accurate implant sockets, okay, you can actually just subtract the implant and the abutment. So now you see I've done another Boolean function. And now you can see the extraction socket as well as the implant socket right there. And so again, just a very simple way to utilize this segmentation feature is creating extraction models, creating accurate demo models to do your mock surgeries on. You know, if we take this now and Aaron wants to do a dry run through it, he can just stick the guide on and he can run his drills all the way to depth because the implant site has been subtracted out. So it's a very useful feature that you can do in that. All right, so jumping forward, here we have
Corey, can I
kind of
just jump
tack.
in with a few
Yep, go
questions
for it.
that came in?
Mhm.
So one is, if you already answered, you could just reiterate, can you Boolean subtract in BlueSkyPlan, or do you need to use Mesh Mixer?
You can do Boolean subtractions in BlueSkyPlan. Now it's kind of hidden away. You've got to go to the Crown and Bridge module, and then let me jump forward and see if I can see which panel that's in. Somewhere right through here. Let's just let this play for a moment. So Crown and Bridge, and there we see it. So it appears that I am in the teeth and editing panel. And when you go to that panel, you'll see down here Boolean operations. If you expand that, you're going to see there's two input boxes. Excuse me. It gives you the option of Boolean union, Boolean intersection, and Boolean difference. So choose which of those you're wanting to do. Are you wanting to combine models? Are you wanting to separate them or subtract them? So I chose Boolean subtraction. And then you can see here, you want to do the Boolean operation between what model? Okay, so there's a drop-down menu here. You choose the model you want to subtract from, and then you'll hit this little plus sign, and that lets you choose the model you want to subtract away from it. And so in this case, I chose the root number 9. And once you do that, you just simply hit apply and you'll have your subtraction. All right.
Okay.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
That's it.
The next question is, are you planning the implant following the wax up of the crown, or are you placing the implant first and then adjusting the root position and the bone considerations?
So I always do everything based on prosthetic positioning first. So normally that would be doing a wax up to digital mock-up. However, in this case, this guy liked his teeth. He didn't really need to change them. You can see those are decent looking teeth for this dentition. And so I was planning the implant based on the existing crown. Now, what I will do though is I'm using the contours that, the outline of the bone segmentation model to help dictate where I'm placing my implants. So, a lot of times with immediates, we tend to place them too shallow. I like to place mine at least a millimeter below the highest point on the bone, because that's usually thin bone, typically on the buccal, and that's going to resorb. So I want to get my implant a little bit deeper than where that bone contour is, so that if there is some resorption, it's not going to affect me a whole lot.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, that's all for now.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to do the temporization. Basically, the idea I came up with is, what if we did a Maryland bridge to replace these, which I just bond on to the lingual of both lateral incisors. And so that's what we did. I had an accurate model that represents the socket forms, and I didn't have to create new crowns. Basically, all I did was I drew an outline on the lingual of these laterals. You could do this in the denture module or in Mesh Mixer, but I just made it like 0.75 millimeters thick because I want to keep those wings thin. Actually, it looks like I went canine to canine. So this was what I ended up developing, and I actually went back and kind of just created a prep on these. Well, I say manually. I did it in the software, but it was kind of an afterthought of how do I create a crown form or a crown prep form on this, because my crowns, I want to exactly represent the teeth that the guy already had. So this was the bottom line. I created this. These wings are 0.75 millimeters thick. They will bond on to the lingual of the laterals and canines. And then these centrals have a really nicely formed and polished ovate ponic form. So remember, we're going to sleep this implant and let it integrate without being loaded. So I do want to go ahead and try to develop the gingival contours. And so you can see it's very well scalloped. It's designed to sit exactly at 1.5 millimeters above the platform of where that implant's going to end up. And then in site number 8, I believe it is, I think this is a mirrored image. In site number 8, it's just going to fit down into that socket to develop an ovate ponic form. And the crowns I printed out of Crown and Bridge material. I don't remember if this was Onyx or Vigo or Ceramco. I've got so many of them. They all seem to work well, so I just kind of use them interchangeably. But anyway, these are the crowns I printed. I just bonded those onto this metal framework. And by the way, this metal framework was 3D printed in chrome cobalt. So I actually outsourced that to Oral Arts Dental Lab in Huntsville, Alabama. They do all my metal printing, but it's pretty affordable. You know, it's about $150 or so to print this in metal. These crowns are really free. You bond it on, and you have a restoration that you could design entirely in-house, and you really only need to outsource the metal printing. You could potentially try printing this whole thing full contour. I just worried about the strength of this breaking right at the connectors with those thin walls. With metal, you just got no worries of that. So here you see it all bonded up, and you get a better view of the intaglio of those ponic forms. And this is how it goes onto the model. Okay. And so everything got polished up. I went ahead and mounted it on some models just because I wanted to check excursive movements and make any adjustments that I needed to make on that, as well as anywhere that the opposing arch was occluding on my metal framework. So you can see here, I see a contact on my metal framework. So I'm just pre-adjusting that out so Aaron won't have as much in the mouth adjusting to do when he delivers this. All right. And so for the surgery, we went ahead and here's the pre-op. He extracted those 2 teeth. Once those 2 teeth are gone, the guide goes on. Always make these windows. You know, I can't stress that. I know that's pretty basic, but always make windows, because if you don't, how do you know that that guide is fully seated? You really can't. And that's critical to the accuracy of everything. So you can see fully seated here, here, here. Guide seated. So he just went through, did the drill protocol with the Blue Sky fully guided keyless kit, and then undersized by 1 drill size so that, you know, he'd get good fixation on this immediate, since it is going to have a gap on the buckle. And here's the implant being guided into place. So fully guiding the implant to depth. And with that done, he can basically just throw a piece of collagen over the implant site, couple of sutures just to keep it stabilized. But really the bandage to keep all of this closed is going to be this Maryland bridge that I've designed. So here he's cementing that in place with just a resin cement. You know, more than likely this will just be able to be popped off, you know, by taking a crown tapper and just aggressively popping down on it. But if not, I mean, those wings, they're thin. You can just braid through those with a burr until it's weak enough that it'll just pop off. And there you see how this case was temporized, and the final x-ray down here. There's your implant, again, pre-designed to sit exactly 1.5 millimeters above the cover screw of the implant. And the patient got to walk out wearing essentially the same teeth that he came in with. Good shade match, everything, contours are the exact same. So again, not all of this had to do with segmentation, but the segmentation of those roots really made this process a lot more accurate for me to know exactly where I've got to develop those ponic forms. So that is that case. Any questions on that one? It looks like there's one up here.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll field it because it's a very general question. The question is there a way to convert the BSB file format to STL OBJ format? So just to give a very quick overview, everything in BlueSkyPlan could be exported to STL or OBJ format. Okay, so there's a tremendous amount that could be done in BlueSkyPlan at no charge. But BlueSkyPlan is based on a freemium business model. So that means you could use a lot of the tools in BlueSkyPlan for free. But if you want to export to STL OBJ, and everything in the software can be exported to STL or OBJ, there is a per case fee. So you could buy small packages of like 6 exports. I think that's around $21 per export. But you can also buy larger packages of 600 exports, for example. And the price per export drops down considerably to around $10, $11 per export. So the bigger the package, the lower the per case fee. But definitely everything in BlueSkyPlan, whether you're creating surgical guides or dentures or aligners or crowns, could be exported. Crowns could actually be exported for free. And a lot of the model editing tools functionality could be exported for free. But everything's exportable. When you're exporting something that was generated, such as a surgical guide or aligner, then those have the export fee, but you could buy the export credits, and only when you're exporting does it hit an export credit and deduct it. Otherwise, you could use a lot of the functionality in BlueSkyPlan for free. But again, to get it out of the software to STL or OBJ, that's where we have the paywall, but it's a very reasonable fee. And to answer your question, yes, everything from BlueSkyPlan could be exported to STL OBJ format.
Yeah, that includes your implants, any of the abutments. If you just go and export those, they're all going to be STL file that you can use in any other program you like. And as Michael mentioned, there's a lot of free stuff in BlueSkyPlan. So let's say if I just wanted to do a wax up of these 2 teeth, you could just go into the crown and bridge module, wax up those 2 teeth, export them. There actually isn't even a charge on that. And so there's a lot of freebie stuff that is in there, things that you can do like closing models, adding bases, that there's no export charges whatsoever. It's really only once you've developed a surgical guide or added implants into the case that you're going to get dinged for an export. Design a denture, design ortho trays, the kind of stuff that you're physically fabricating within the program. That's what's going to be associated with the exports. But again, they're very reasonable, especially when you look at the cost of many of the other dental programs that are out there.
Basically, the
All
idea
right, so
is that when you've generated something that you know you're going to use and you know you're going to apply it to treating a patient, that's when there's a fee.
yep. Okay, so just to demo something else, I took this same case and I went ahead and I had extracted the socket from tooth number 4, just pretending like we were doing an implant, but I'm going to do it for a different purpose this time. And so here you see, if I had a virtual implant placed at tooth number 4, which is what I'm doing right now, you can see having that socket form is pretty helpful to be able to judge where you need to put the implant. So you're going to see me turn on the bone outline here. All right, now I can see the bone contours. And again, I want to get following that root trajectory, but you see how I'm a little bit subcrestal from where that bone is. But now what I'm doing is I've put on a tie base. So this is the 1.8 millimeter emergence tie base from Blue Sky. Now I'm making a custom healing abutment, and you could do that in a couple of different ways. You could go into the crown and bridge module and just design a screw retained crown, and that would be a great way to do this. However, another way that you could do it, let's say that you wanted to accurately represent the exact socket form in the way that this emerges. So I'm going to tackle this one a little different way. Here you can see I've got that root superimposed. So everything that's above this little platform on my tie base, I'm going to just cut away, because obviously, you're not going to have anything below the margin of your tie base. Did it the wrong way there. So I'm cutting away everything on the bottom part. And again, going back to this whole idea of Boolean functions, I can just take this now into the crown and bridge module, and I can Boolean subtract that abutment from this virtual tooth root or tooth crown, I guess it is now. And what you'll see is that it's going to, in essence, create a custom healing abutment. All right, now, yes, it's going to be a little wider here at the buccal and lingual, and I would just, trim that by hand, but it would go perfectly into this. So here we are again in the tooth editing panel. I'm going to do a Boolean difference between this remaining crown and this implant and abutment. All right. And I'm going to create an offset of about 0.25. That's your cement spacer. And so here's what it generates. All right. And I didn't cut all that away, so I can just hit isolate on this. And now I have a custom healing abutment. All right. So you could do that for an entire crown, but you could also do that just for a custom healing abutment with as much emergence as you want. So wherever your gingiva ends up, you can end up just taking a burr and flattening this down so it's not an occlusion. Okay. And in the process of flattening that, that's, you're going to have your screw access hole. So that's a nice way to utilize this. All right. Let's see questions. Which software we can use to compare and evaluate two STL files? It depends on how it is you're wanting to compare the STLs. I mean, BlueSkyPlan file or BlueSkyPlan lets you import an STL and superimpose it, and you can compare model outlines. So that's a really good way to do that. If you're trying to, gauge exact tolerances between those, I mean, I guess you could use the measure tool, but you would probably be using, something like SolidWorks, I would think, to do that, like more of not so much a dental CAD program as just a CAD engineering program.
So if I could just add to that comment, not only could you superimpose the models on top of each other, you could turn on the outline of each of those models. And then in the 2D slices as well, you could get a very good evaluation about the comparison between the two of them. We actually have a video, not about surgical guides as much, but for a liner application, that you're able to compare the model from the particular liner step that was done in the digital plan to an intraoral scanner during the liner treatment. And you could superimpose the models on top of each other. You could check it in the 2D views as well. And that's a fantastic way to visually see in different colors the comparison between the two models and know if the patient's teeth are tracking correctly during their liner treatment. So you could definitely use other softwares. I think you could try it out in BlueSkyPlan. I think you'll be, very pleased with the information that you get there.
Yep. Okay, so kind of go into a different case. This is more of a full arch bone supported guide case, and anytime I do any kind of case, it's always prosthetically driven. And so if the patient's smile is messed up or missing teeth or whatever, for me, I'm not going to start planning implants until I've developed a digital wax up. Well, if their teeth are not where they like them, or if they need to be changed, then first of all, I've got to figure out how to do my digital wax up. So I do a lot of 2D image alteration, simulations, that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of tools that you can use for this. So I'm gonna push escape here. So I'm out of presenter mode, but that's so I can show you this stuff. This is just a template that I've made, right? So you can see these are just two horizontal lines that are parallel. So usually what I'll do is I'll take this picture and I'll align it until this line is passing straight through their interpupillary line. And that's going to orient the patient's head to my grid. All right. And then since this line is parallel, I can basically pull this down. And now I'll use that as a gauge to say, okay, well, I'd like to bring my incisal edge to maybe right here. Okay. I'll utilize all this in my smile simulation. And I've got other tools in here. This is a golden proportions ruler essentially that I've made. And what I'll do with this is I'll try to scale it where I've got the red line here just on the distal of each canine. And this is scalable, so it keeps it scaled in golden proportions based on your picture. All right. And so that's going to give me an idea of, as I'm doing my 2D simulation, my centrals ought to occupy this space. And I want to bring this incisal edge down to the green line. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of this entire process. You can also gauge it off of the alar width. In her case, she's got a pretty narrow nose, so we're slightly wider than the alar width. You've even got a smile line. So we know the smile should follow the curvature of the lip. And so I can take this line and this can be, made more or less round, and I can superimpose this over whatever area I'd like. So if I want the smile line to follow this, then I could put, again, the incisal edge right there and develop the curvature I'd like the incisal edges to follow as I'm doing this. Okay, so going back here, what I'll oftentimes then do, so I have about 3 different ways I'll do smile simulations. One is in PowerPoint entirely. It's a little clunky. I've got a YouTube video up on how to do that. The other is to do it in just a dedicated smile design software, something like DTS Pro is one that I've used. There's Christian Coachman's smile design software, the DSD stuff. Or you can actually just use this free program called GIMP, and you can do it entirely within GIMP or kind of do a hybrid. So one thing that you cannot do in PowerPoint is you cannot create a PNG file that allows you to basically cut out what's in between the lips. So a lot of times, if I want to kind of do a hybrid workflow, I'll take this facial picture into GIMP and I'll just cut the mouth out, okay? And then save it. And now this is going to be the exact same image as the image right here. It's just got the mouth cut out. And what that allows me to do now is to put basically a tooth sandwich, right? I can take teeth such as this, and I can follow, the guidelines I'd set forth. I'll pull these down, I'll pull that down. I can just tweak this and play with it. These are all things that you can just make yourself in PowerPoint. And then once I've positioned teeth according to where I want them, I can pull this over and put it right back line over this, and there you have a simulation, okay? And if I bring this image and this image to the front, oops. I guess I'd need to pull a smile with it. Anyway, you get the idea. I could just bring all that to the front and get rid of these lines, like send this to the back. And then those would be out of the way. And you would have this photorealistic smile simulation. So extremely, extremely useful for a lot of purposes. One is your treatment planning, like what I'm doing here, because once I develop a smile design in 2D on an image that I like, I've got a simulation that looks appropriate for the patient's face. That's going to be what dictates my wax up. I'm not just guessing and trying to just, superimpose teeth over what they've got. I'll actually use my 2D simulation to know, okay, the incisal edges of 8 and 9 need to be 1.3 millimeters longer than where they currently are. And it just makes your simulation, your wax up be really efficient and much more accurate. But the other thing that this is super useful for is your patient presentation. These things are so quick to make, depending on which software you make or you're using. It might be as little as 1 minute. But I'm telling you, this will sell more dentistry than probably anything else that you can do. If you ever have a patient come in that doesn't love the way their smile looks, even something as simple as whitening, circle their teeth and take the exposure up, make it brighter, and maybe they choose to do whitening. It's very simple to do, but it's a very big patient motivator. And when they see themselves with a photorealistic picture of what can be accomplished, they'll oftentimes buy into treatment. Even if they don't have the money that day, once they see this, they're going to take this picture home, stick it on their refrigerator, and look at it every day. People come into money. If not, maybe they'll rob somebody and come do some dental work. But nonetheless, they're going to find the money for what's important to them. And one of the biggest ways to make it important to them is to show them what's possible. So many people have been living for 30 years with a terrible looking smile. They just don't even think there's hope. They don't know what the possibilities are. So when you can show them something like this that really looks realistic, that's a big motivator. Okay. So those are both factors of why I do these simulations quite a bit.
Cory,
And
can
with
I
that
plug one of our
Yep.
new digital products?
Do it.
We have a app called iSmile Teledentistry. iSmile is the brand that we use for anything that's patient focused, because obviously we don't want patients going to Blue Sky Bio or blueskybio.com. That's for dentists. So anything that's patient focused is iSmile Teledentistry. The app is available to download from the app stores at no charge. In the app, one of the new AI features that we have is the ability to snap a photo of the patient smiling, and within around a minute, you get back the patient with a much improved digital tooth setup. So that's for a 2D photo. What Cory's explaining is probably more accurate, but you should definitely try out the iSmile Teledentistry app. It keeps getting better as time goes on, again, because it's AI machine learning. And that, again, within a minute, you'll get back a 2D photo of the patient with their improved teeth.
And that's going to be huge when that is automated to literally punching a button and it analyzes their face, and all this stuff that I just showed manually about golden proportions and all that. When it can do that automatically and you can just spit out a picture of a before and after for that patient, that is so game changing. I can't even express it. I'll have to go get a back transplant so I can go back into clinical dentistry, because man, I would absolutely love to have something like that in clinical practice.
Sorry,
Okay,
so one
so
second. The URL for
yep.
that is iSmile.app, and it's available in the app stores as well. iSmile Teledentistry, it's iSmile.app. And Cory, there's another question that came in asking for the names of those softwares that you mentioned earlier for the model comparisons.
Well, for the model comparisons, in BlueSkyPlan, you could do it in SolidWorks, which is an engineering software. You could do it in Rhino, which is an engineering software. To a degree, you can do it in exocad, which is more of a dental CAD software that, their best fit matching algorithm is pretty good. So you could do it there. But honestly, like when we've done things for, sometimes for products that we're bringing through FDA, we have to prove the accuracy of them in their printed form as opposed to their digital form. So imagine like ortho trays. This is a project I had to do. We generated ortho trays for clear aligners, right? But then you actually have to print those in this material. And the FDA wants to know, is the 3D print that you're getting, is it actually true to the digital file you designed? So what we can do is we can scan that tray in its printed form, pull it back into Blue Sky and superimpose it. And then I'll just use the measuring tool, which is up here, and measure the outlines in those 2D views. And you can actually see what the tolerances are. And, we found that it was very accurate. But, again, it all comes down to exactly what is the goal, what are you trying to measure? And really the program I use would be dictated by that. Is that all the questions?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so we did a 2D simulation on this lady. She's going to have upper full arch implants. And so now we need to do our wax up. Okay, so I'll do my wax ups usually in BlueSkyPlan. I typically use the denture module for a full arch just because it's faster and I like using the tooth chain. But here you see her CT. We've opened up her CT. Blue Sky has done the segmentation. It was very accurate. Here I was even impressed by its accuracy on the PFM crowns. Like, look at these PFMs and look how accurately the segmentation turned those into an STL. And so we've got all of that data. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continually reference back and forth to that simulation photo. And I didn't show an image of it, but one of the things you can do in that is you can actually turn the transparency of your simulation down about 50%. So that you can see, here's my simulation of where I'd like the teeth to be, but underneath it, you can see their natural teeth and know, okay, here's where their teeth are. And thus, when I'm going into the denture module and I'm setting all of these teeth up, I just make those position changes accordingly. So you can see here, we're a little bit longer on the incisal edge of this one. I liked the facial aspect of these teeth, so I didn't change that. We just put everything where it belonged according to that 2D simulation. And here's the final wax up that we've developed. And then I brought in her opposing intraoral scan so that I can check the occlusion. right? And so this is not a closed model, so I can actually just look internally and I can see there's just a tiny interference here, here, and here, which we can adjust out. And there's the final wax up in its final form relative to her maxilla. Okay, so this is where the teeth need to go. And based on that, so this is another time-lapse video. So what you're going to see me do in this video is this is maybe a 10-minute video, but I'm going to now take my prosthetic wax up and I'm going to virtually position implants. Again, this is made much easier by having the bone outlines and not really wondering or trying to discern it from the CT scan. I can see where the bone is, know that I'm putting my implants into bone, and then I'm prosthetically positioning them based on my digital wax up. So let's go ahead and do that. So here I'm placing some implants, and you can see I'm going, this is going to be kind of an all-on-4 configuration. So I'm going to get it into the volume of bone. And let me just mention real quick, you're going to see this orange outline throughout. What that is, and let's just go back. All right, do you see this shape right here? Because it's going to go fast. This is just an STL I made, which is basically a stock plane of reduction. All right, so the way I'll utilize this is I'll take this. This measures 16 millimeters from right here to right here, which is about the ideal space for a hybrid, right? So if I've done an ideal wax up and I position this where the occlusal plane is resting on this middle portion, then that means up here is going to be 16 millimeters of clearance. And that's essentially going to be the bone reduction guide. All right, so you'll see me here pull that in. All right, and what I want to do is now position this. So I want to get it going right along the occlusal plane, and it's easy to visualize that. So I'll have the cusp tips just protruding through. And I'm looking at this back area, and basically at my distalmost tooth is where I want to taper my cut out of the bone. All right. So I know there's other ways, and I've shown them how to do, bone reduction cuts and everything. This is just something new, like this morning new that I'm doing. And I'm really liking it, actually. It's kind of nice to have that stock shape that I can just pull in. So I like to start by getting my front 2 implants placed. And again, if I pause this here, this is a great reference. Remember, the occlusal table is resting on that. So this upper portion represents 16 millimeters. That's the prosthetic space that's needed for a hybrid. So when I'm positioning these implants, since a hybrid is what's requested on this patient, I'm going to position my implants deep enough that they're just above, below, however you want to think of it, this 16 millimeter clearance line, because that's how much bone is going to need to be removed for me to have room for these implants. So you're seeing me, I'm placing those things just deeper than that 16 millimeter plane. So with that one done, I'll duplicate it, pull it over to the other lateral area, and we'll fine tune that. Once again, I'm looking at that bone reduction guide, and that tells me how deep I need to take this. So those look nice and parallel. Now I'm going to do some disto-angulated implants in the posterior. I've placed a 30-degree 30-degree custom abutment on them. And you can, once you do that, it may not be going 30 degrees in the right direction, but you can spin that around and play with the timing. Again, I'm going just apical to that 16 millimeter plane. And I want to make sure it's in the volume of bone. And then by just twisting the timing of it, I can determine where my emergence needs to be. So now I've duplicated that, and I'm pulling this over to the other side for my other disto-angulated implant. And you saw me adjust the timing there. All right, depth, that's going to determine my depth. That's all based on prosthetic space requirements. All right, I'm in bone everywhere, and now I play with the timing and I get that going through the occlusal surface. Here's my final implant positions. Okay, so this is where my implants need to go, and I am getting the parallelism of those distoangulated ones uprighted just a little bit. And there again, you see that's going to be what is in here represents your prosthetic space. So I'll take this, and that curvature just needs to taper out just distal to your back implants. So I'm just moving that over slightly, and you'll see how I utilize that to make my bone reduction guide. All right, so we've got these implants. What I'm doing now is I'm going to just create a guide. Now notice I have no guide tubes on whatsoever, but this is useful because I know that my reduction guide is what this is going to become. My reduction guide needs to go beyond that orange line, right? Because everything below this orange line is going to get cut off. So I'm making sure I've got about 3 millimeters of space above and beyond that orange plane of reduction, so that I don't end up with any areas that are, way too thin. I bring it back to where I started, and now we're going to create the surgical guide. Okay, so this is going to generate just a basic guide. It's essentially a night guard on the bone at the moment. But imagine now, if I Boolean subtract this orange object from this blue object, what do I have? I have a bone reduction guide. So back into crown and bridge module, we're going to use the Boolean operations again. And I'm going to subtract the orange from this blue guide. I'll do that first. All right, now it generates a new model, so you'll have to turn that off to see it. But do you see how that now is my bone reduction guide? I'll just have to get rid of this floating portion. Now I'll do the same thing. I'm going to subtract the orange object from my maxilla. That's going to generate a file that represents my reduced maxilla. All right, so let's go back into advanced mode, and I'm going to just use the isolate tool here to make those floating bits disappear. So there we have it. When I change the color, now you see we have a reduction guide. All right, now I've paused it here. A couple of things to note. One, we're only 13 minutes into this. Okay, so the only thing that had been done prior to this is the auto segmentation. Again, BlueSky does that on its own, and the wax up. The wax up takes however long it's going to take. It just depends on how fast you are. If you're following kind of some of those guides like I do it, I'd say it's 4 to 5 minutes. But the actual implant planning and everything, all the way to the point where we have a bone reduction guide, we're 13.5 minutes in, which is really good. Okay, so now the thing I'm missing on this reduction guide is I don't have pin tubes. And there's a reason why I didn't place them beforehand, because if you had gone ahead and generated that first guide with your pin tubes, well, your pin tubes are always going to be angulated, kind of coming down and forward out of the mouth, just for access purposes. So what would have happened when you Boolean subtracted that orange plane of reduction is it would have cut through your pin tubes as well. And now you're left trying to reconstruct that. So I don't do that. There's a simpler way to kind of hack the software to get around that, which is to initially just make a guide with no tubes in it, right? And repurpose that into your bone reduction guide. That's where we're at right now. All right. Now, I also wanted to make this top kind of a flat plane. And so jumping back there, because it happened so quick, you'll see I just used the cut tool, and I just put a big flat cut across the top that parallels this one. All right. Now we got a nice clean looking bone reduction guide. So how can we go ahead now and incorporate pins into this? Well, that's what we're showing next. So now I'm positioning my pins. See how it's got this downward trajectory coming down and out the front of the mouth? So you'll position those, make sure you're not hitting any vital structures. You can adjust your tube lengths and everything. I'm adjusting these so that they don't need a metal sleeve. That's a clinician's choice. Doesn't matter which way you go with that. And now I've duplicated it, and I'm pulling one over to the right, and we're going to shoot for doing 3 pins here. All right, so this is going into the bone. I'm making sure I'm not hitting any adjacent implants, and I'm not going out the lingual plate. And then I duplicate again, pull it to the other side, and there's our 3 pins. So you can see I'm kind of struggling to find the space in between the implants, but just use that tangential view. You can even turn on your transparency here on this maxillary model and just look visually. And that's sometimes helpful to know what you need to do with that pin to get it where it's, not interfering with anything. Okay, so there's my pins. I've got my links set on everything, and let me pause. Oh man. All right, let me jump forward and find that again. All right, so if you have these pins positioned, right, and you've got this reduction guide that you've made, but it doesn't have those pins incorporated, what is a good, easy way that you can force the software to build those pin tubes into the guide? I'm putting you on the spot, Michael. Can you think of a good way to do it?
Say that again. What's the question?
All right, so if I've got a reduction guide here, which has no pin tubes, right? It's just a reduction guide. And I wanted to now make that into, all right, so you've got just this top portion, but no pin tubes. And then I add pins and I want to incorporate those into that guide. How would you do it? It's kind of crappy to put you on the spot, but I wanted to try it nonetheless.
No, what's the issue? You have the reduction and you want to add, okay, and a Boolean. Oh, truth is, I'm thinking out loud, we actually have new functionality to combine surfaces in BlueSkyPlan. So
So
one
you
way to
could combine your tubes here, but what you'll run into that is the hole's going to be filled in right here because remember, this is solid.
Okay.
All right. So I'll quit picking on you, but the reason I bring that up is I can't tell you how many hoops I used to jump through of doing all this Boolean stuff and trying to figure out a way to get around this. And the solution was so simple, as these things usually are. Think not about this case for a second. Think about a denture scan appliance. So you've done a dual scan, right? And you've brought that into Blue Sky, and now you have this STL of their denture in the case and it's stitched in position and you want to turn it into a guide. What do? You go to guide panel and you hit create a scan appliance guide. And if you think about what happens in that, it just duplicates the denture shape, but it builds in those guide tubes. And that's what I'm going to do to bring those pin tubes in. Do you see, I just hit create scan appliance guide and now look what it generated. Easiest thing in the world. That was so much simpler than anything else I was doing. Crap, I keep screwing this up. All right, so now we have a perfect reduction guide and we're here. Now, I know many of you and I know Michael are allergic somewhat to Mesh Mixer, but this is one step where, it's just hard to build this functionality into BlueSkyPlan because it'll bog the program down and there'll be like 5 users in the United States that'll use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, so I've got a bone reduction guide. Well, after I've done bone reduction, I need an implant guide, right? I need something to guide my drills and to guide my implant placement. Well, it sure would be nice if I could just repurpose the one guide I've already got and turn it into that. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to turn on the implant tubes and I'm changing the guide tube wall thickness to be like 2 millimeters, I think. So now I've got these. I'm going to export that guide and these tubes all together, and I'm going to open them in Mesh Mixer. All right. So let's export them. And this is going to become my drill guide. All right. So now I've opened this in Mesh Mixer. And first of all, I'm going to connect each implant tube. I just draw on the wall of it, and I hit the button that says tube handle. So now I essentially have a bar. All right. I selected a spot, tube handle, and it connects them. But this is still floating up in the air up above your implants. So now I want to connect this bar to this reduction guide, and that's going to generate my drill guide. So for that, I'll use this add tube feature, which is in Mesh Mixer. And you can see when you punch that add tube button, it just gives you a red dot on each end. We can position each end where we want it to be. I can control the radius of the thickness of these tubes, but I'll basically just do a buccal and a lingual connection from each tube down to the guide. And this is the final result. All right, and now I can just pull that back into BlueSkyPlan and you'll kind of see how this all lines up. All right. Once again, here's the original tubes from BlueSkyPlan turned on. This guide is now a drill guide. You know it's going to fit the exact same way that your reduction guide did because it literally is the same guide, right? It's just with the addition of these tubes. And granted, there's ways I could have stayed entirely within BlueSkyPlan, but I would have had to do a different guide design. The reason I really like this type of a drill guide design is because it keeps everything open. It's kind of this open cage design where your irrigation can get in there. It's not being blocked off by a guide plastic. You can see the bone, you can visualize sockets, all that kind of stuff. Like I can literally see the bone as I'm doing all of this stuff. But as far as fit, it's going to fit the exact same way that the reduction guide did, because again, they're one and the same from here down. So your pins are going to go into the same spot. If you insert this and you can't get your pin to go in, what does that tell you? It tells you that you're not fully seated because it ought to fit the exact same. And so you need to readjust until your pins line up. When the pins go back in, now you've got a simple method to do a swappable guide case. So again, I want you to be mindful of the time here because this is a real timer running through all of this. It took 22.5 minutes to place all the implants, to develop a bone reduction guide and a swappable drill guide, 22.5 minutes. So when I hear people talking about, oh, this guided stuff, especially for full arch, just takes way too long. I mean, maybe I can sympathize with you if you're trying to make stackable guides, because those definitely are a step up in difficulty. But if you're willing to do just a simple swappable guide like this, I mean, I know I'm faster than most because I've done this forever, but this is not out of the realm of possibility. 22.5 minutes. I mean, that's not a long time to treatment plan a case that you're probably making $20,000 on. And it's going to make it go smoother. It will be more accurate. And you can have your prosthetics made ahead of time because you know where the implants are going to end up. So it should cut down on your conversion time by a ton. Should at least cut that in half. So anyway, that's doing a simple swappable guide case. And that's kind of A to Z how I do that. The only thing I didn't show was doing the wax up on that. But everything else is done. So I see there's a couple of questions. You want to fire them off at me, Michael?
Sure. How much does it cost to send out for metal printing per guide? How thick would these guides need to be if we're making them with surgical guide resin?
Okay, so obviously the cost is going to depend where you send it. I've done most of my metal printing with Oral Arts because they're right down the road. They're affordable. I get a little bit of a price break than what, Joe Q Public is going to get just because I send them in volume. But I think for just like if any of the listeners just wanted to send a file in, it's either $150 or $200. And I don't remember which, but it's one of those two. So like going back to, that Maryland bridge I designed, send it to them. Let's just go with 150. If you, let's say, want to have that metal, that reduction guide that we designed a minute ago printed in metal, same thing, $150. And they do give you the option of electro polishing it and all of that stuff. But it's going to be per item, so if you did a swappable case, you're going to do 150 for the reduction, 150 for the drill guide. But really, if you're doing stackable, you're looking at the same thing because you're going to have 150 on the reduction guide, 150 for the stackable portion on top. So might beg the question, why not just keep it real simple and do a swappable guide case? If you noticed on this one, my dimensions are pretty thick here. This is 3 millimeters thick guide, and then my tubes are like 2 millimeters thick. anything that you do in metal, you can bring the dimensions way, way down. So we could do as little as like 0.7 millimeters of thickness on the buckle and lingual, which will make this slide in under your flaps way easier. I mean, night and day easier. And it's less volume for them to print, but from your perspective, the easier thing is it's just so much easier to insert with less of a flap. Same with bringing down the dimensions of your wall thickness on your tubes. If you don't know where to do that, it's under tools, and then you go to the bottom at preferences, and you'll see there's a setting that you can alter for guide tube wall thickness. The metal printers, at least Oral Arts metal printer, it doesn't play nice with anything that's less than 0.5 millimeter in dimensions. So that's your bottom line. You can't make like walls thinner than 0.5 millimeter, but down to 0.5 millimeter, it's extremely accurate. I'm not so sure it isn't more accurate than the resin printers, to be quite honest with you. Now, the converse that you asked was, okay, if I wanted to do this in resin, what do I need the dimensions to be? Well, personally, when I've done these cases in resin, if I'm doing it with a buckle and a lingual, then I'll usually just make it be the standard 3 millimeter default thickness that Blue Sky makes a guide at. If I'm trying to make it be a buckle only, which now turns this into a much less stiff shape, you know, it's just one buckle wall, I feel like you probably need additional thickness on that. I'll bump that up to say 4 or 5. Now, all of that said, the nice thing about resin printing is it's going to cost you like, 75 cents to print these guides. So if you want to make it thin in dimension where it still goes in under your flap easily, your risk is going to be that it'll break. Well, okay, big deal. Print 4 of them. If you have something break during the procedure, take it out, throw it in the trash, and just stick in the new one, right? So there's pros and cons to metal versus resin. Resin's far weaker, but it's much cheaper, so you can make backups. Metal's a lot more expensive, but it's going to be insanely strong. You'll just need the one guide, and it's going to be rock solid. So that's kind of the answer to that. How about the other question?
Did you make the reduction plane STL using the add tube function? Or how did you make the reduction plane STL?
The way I made that, here, let me just show you real quick. So I did it in your favorite program, Mesh Mixer. All right, so I'm going to just show you how I do this real quick. All right, I'm going to start by importing a plane. All right, there's a plane. If I wanted this to have 16 millimeters of interocclusal space, then I could just select it all and extrude it up 16 millimeters. Okay. And I'll probably want this thing to be, wider. So I can transform it, make it wider and longer. But as far as its thickness, it's 16 millimeters in vertical height. All right, now to get that curvature on the back, what I would do is just go up here to Mesh Mix. Let me accept that. All right, Mesh Mixer. I'm going to grab a cylinder, and I'm going to make this 32 millimeters in dimension. Okay. By orienting it flat on this face, now I can transform it and just rotate it 90 degrees. Okay. And bring it down 16 millimeters. So I can just punch that in. Do you see how that now is right in line with the top dimension of this? Okay. So essentially I could do that and, combine these two and make them solid. So let's do that. Combine. Actually, let's don't combine. Before I do that, I'll duplicate one of them. So that and that we combine, we could make solid, accept that. And if I just wanted to make it all look pretty, I could bring this down. And I could stretch it a little bit further. And then I'll just Boolean subtract that. So now I could take this shape, subtract that shape. And now you have a homemade plane of reduction that you could bring into any case. And again, the idea being that it's 16 millimeters if you measure from here to here. So if I have, let me grab something real quick. Maxilla, let's just bring that in. Any arch you've got, you know, I'm assuming you've either got a good looking existing arch or you've done a wax up. Okay, so, and I would do this in BlueSkyPlan. I just don't have this open at the moment. So that curved part always goes towards the distal, right? You're going to line this up. And then you're going to parallel the occlusal plane. So I can just basically look at where it's shining through the bottom. All right. Get it parallel to the occlusal plane, which that's pretty close. All right. Which would mean if we had the maxilla superimposed over here, the top of this is your plane of reduction. If your prosthetic wax up that you've done has the teeth right here, how much space do you need for a hybrid? You need about 15 to 16 millimeters of prosthetic space. All right, well, your teeth cusp tips are right here, and this is 16 millimeters thick. So where does that mean you need to put your implants? It means you need to set your implants right above the top of this. And that means that you can also utilize this to make your bone reduction cuts. Again, this can be pulled forward. If your distal most implant was right here, I'd probably pull it where it begins curving down, just distal to that. And now if I want to make a bone reduction guide, I'll do a Boolean difference. And there you would have it. All right, so I know this is not a legit case, but since you asked, that's the basics of how I would do that. Any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
All right, cool. Okay, so showing you this swappable guide approach. Now, I didn't do that in this case. The doc I was working with on this case wanted to do stackable. And so I made stackable guides, and I just threw this in because this is just kind of cool. But what you're seeing here is the bone reduction guide. This thing is only, I think, 2 millimeters tall in vertical dimension. So again, it's going to be really easy to go onto the maxilla and to slide under your flap. It's basically buckle only, except for, since the teeth were going to be gone, I was using actually the bone to index this in place. So you see, this is going to rest on the occlusal surface of the bone, as well as that hook, just on the occlusal aspect. It doesn't go over to the lingual. And then I made a real small little hook that will orient onto the maxilla in the front as well. So I have a tripod of things that even if the doc does his extractions first, he can just carry this thing into the mouth. There's only one way it's going to seat down. And once it's seated, he can drill his pinholes, pin it into place, and he's going to reduce bone down to the level of this reduction guide. Once he's done that, he can take the stackable drill guide, and this will stack on. You can see these are all magnets. So I actually have 6 magnets, which is about, let's see, that's 12 total magnets at like 1 pound a piece. So you have about 12 pounds of retention between these objects. I mean, they're really on there. And then these little pegs are what orients it and eliminates any potential of side to side or front to back movement. So the magnets provide retention. The pegs are providing the indexing into position. And then beyond that, we again, when you're doing things guided, you know where the implants are going to end up. And that's a huge benefit because that means I can pre-design all my prosthetics. You know, everyone right now is really into the photogrammetry, and they'll just, hey, wherever the implants end up, we'll take a scan real quick, and then we'll use that to build in screw holes into a temp, and we'll deliver it the next day. That's great. More power to you if you like that workflow. Personally, I'd rather have it made ahead of time and just deliver my final temp that day while they're sedated, and then be done with it and never have to touch that again until it's time to restore. So, different strokes, there's not a right or wrong. That's just my preference. Okay, so you can see here how the drill guide magnetically seats onto this. I believe this was for BioHorizons implants, hence the different tube shapes. But then once you've delivered that and you've put on your temp cylinders, this temp will magnetically seat on as well into the same little magnetic interface, and you can just pick up your cylinders. Now, this was a new addition. For the longest time, I made my temps, and I always like to have a metal reinforcement inside of my temp because it makes it much more resilient to breaking. And the way I was doing that for the longest time was I would more or less build a bar very similar to this that would seat down into the temp. And that worked, usually. The thing I finally discovered when I actually got to be clinically present in a couple of these cases was, even when you're doing guided surgery, sometimes you end up with a crappy implant site and you don't have primary fixation, and maybe you move to a different site, or maybe the doctor doesn't fully guide the implant into place, and so the trajectory ends up a little bit off of where it was anticipated to be. Well, if you've done a reinforcement like this, then if that cylinder doesn't fall perfectly within this hole, now you're trying to adjust and stretch this hole in chrome cobalt, which you might as well just bang your head on the wall, because that stuff is so hard. You'll go through 500 burrs trying to adjust it and stretch this long vertical hole in chrome cobalt. So the solution to that, once I knew it was a problem, was to, instead of making a vertical metal reinforcement, is now I just basically make the bottom side of my temp be metal with really big passive holes, right, for pickup. That way, if I have to move a hole over a little bit or something, it's really not going to affect me that much. And I'll primarily be adjusting in resin. But even if I have to adjust on the metal, let's say if we had to move an implant further back distal, this is only 1 millimeter thick. And so it's pretty easy now to adjust on something that's only 1 millimeter thick of chrome cobalt, as opposed to a big 6 millimeter tall vertical bar. And so that's the idea here. And just to help position it, I put these 3 little parallel pegs on it, and here's the receiving holes for those. And so this just gets bonded onto this ahead of time, and you don't have to mess with it during the procedure. And the cool thing is that since it is bonded ahead of time, once it's in there, I can actually polish this thing up to a mirror finish, which gives a very nice surface for your tissue to sit against. It will develop great contours and everything, and all you'll have to contour is the bottom side and basically taper it into your cylinder with a nice smooth transition where you pick your cylinders up. All right, so that's the idea there. And again, here you see nice mirror finish on this. But again, imagine that this implant right here had to get scooted over by 2 millimeters. Well, okay, big deal. I'll have to adjust through a bit of metal, but it's only 1 millimeter thick. The rest of this is resin, so that's going to be easy to adjust through. So that was the concept of why I did the temps like this. All right, and it's basically not visible from the patient's perspective. It's just the intaglio of this restoration. Okay, so again, I would challenge people, what is the mode of failure of this? Because I can tell you, I've got some of these that I have taken my hand to and tried to break them like a horseshoe. I've tried to squeeze molar to molar. I've tried every which way to break these, and it's virtually impossible. The only mode of failure on a restoration like this is that you potentially chip a tooth. Well, big deal. If your temp is PMMA and you break a tooth off, you have to mill a new PMMA. With this, put some bonding agent on it and fix it in the mouth with composite. Even in a worst case scenario, let's say they broke a 4-tooth section off. Okay, well, I'll just bang this thing with a hammer. That'll all fall off, and I just reprint the superstructure. So I'm really liking the idea of these for not only for my interim restorations, but as a permanent restoration option for those patients who can't afford your zirconia hybrid or your PFM hybrid or your fill in the blank hybrid that your lab is going to make you. Pretty much any good hybrid from a lab is going to run minimum $3,500 up to $6,000, $7,000. Well, again, if you've got a financially challenged patient, maybe they can afford the implants, they just can't afford the expensive restoration. I've got $150 in printing this metal intaglio and maybe $5 in printing the superstructure. Paint on a little gingiva. There's hardly a patient in Winchester, Tennessee, probably not in all of Tennessee, that would refuse this restoration if I took the time to make the pink look nice. And your entire restoration's under $200. So can't you pass some savings on along to the patient for that? Maybe instead of charging $12,000 for the hybrid because you've got this big lab bill, well, now that your lab bill's $200, maybe charge $1,500 for this. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But I think a lot of us are shooting ourselves in the foot and not getting to do cases because we're not willing to think outside the box of ways to make this affordable for people. I mean, think right now, most of you watching this are probably rich dentists with a ton of disposable income. If tomorrow you had to drop, $30,000 to have an all on X fully restored, could you do it? Or are you going to have to do some digging around to find the cash? Or are you going to put off treatment because it's too much to let go of at once? Man, give people some more options other than just how you've always done it, because that's how we've done it. All right, I'm gonna get off the soapbox. Here is the printed model, again, all done from Blue Sky Segmentation. You can see the intimate fit of this bone reduction guide. It's pinned into place. Fuzzy picture, sorry, but in an ideal world, your implants are going to end up exactly where these are in this virtual model. So going back to the person who asked about exporting various surfaces, the way this model is generated is I just exported my reduced maxilla and my custom abutments, which were like 3 millimeters in diameter. When I exported those together, now they're one STL file, I can print those. And that gives me a model that I can try all this stuff on. My temporary, my drill guide, all of that. So here's the drill guide. Hopefully your implants end up right where those printed pegs are. That's it from a frontal view. And then here is the restoration as it's going to go on there. All right. And again, is it the same aesthetics as a really nice zirconia hybrid? Obviously it's not. This was a 5-minute pink job, but even in this form with minimal effort expended to do the pink, if you've got a patient that just wants to get back into having teeth, especially if they're coming from teeth to start with, tell me they're going to refuse this. You're crazy. They're not going to. So there's more affordable options out there than you might be thinking of. All right. And again, hopefully after you place your implants and you put on your multi-unit cylinders, when you drop on this temporary restoration onto the magnets, hopefully you see that your cylinders are coming right out the center of each of these holes. And the only thing you're going to have to do is your pickup. Take your dual cure injection material, inject in the space between your temp cylinder and this to lock them together. And when that's set, you undo all the screws, you take this out. These little magnetic portions just get cut off. And now you have your hybrid. Okay. And this hybrid, if you didn't notice, is designed to sit exactly 3 millimeters off of the bone. Remember, we know where the bone contour is going to end up, right? Because we're using a reduction guide to get it there. And you pretty much always want 3 millimeters of space from your bone to the intaglio. So I've got exactly that to the micron, 3 millimeters of space from the reduced jaw down to this highly polished intaglio of my temporary. All right. And again, financially challenged people, if you really nailed your wax up in your preoperative planning and you deliver this and it looks amazing, I'm going to challenge you. Why can't that be the final for a patient that just is trying to save money? No reason it couldn't be is the answer. So let's see. Good question. Good time for questions if you got some, Michael.
Yeah. Okay. Have you done intaglio in this way with Trilor? How is the tissue response?
I have, but Trilor, for those of you who aren't aware of what Trilor is, it's a resin reinforced fiberglass. So it's fiberglass, laid in all different directions, infiltrated with resin. Now, the downside to Trilor and really any kind of fiberglass is that it has to be fully encased. You can't leave any of it exposed to the mouth, even in its unadjusted state, because eventually it will wear a little and it leaves fiberglass exposed. So you can pull this off with Trilor, but I found it difficult to get it to all fit in there. The smallest Trilor arch bar dimension is 3.5 millimeters thick, up to 7.5 millimeters thick. So you end up with quite a bit of your vertical height, 3.5 millimeters of this overall 16 millimeter thick restoration is going to be Trilor. And it doesn't do as well once you start punching these big pickup holes in it, right? So if you were to look at here, once you have punched these big pickup holes in it, you're left with really just a small, thin area of that Trilor still intact and a lot fewer fiberglass fibers to hold its integrity. So, I mean, bottom line is, yes, you can do it, but it's going to be much, much weaker than this. And it's a lot less lab work. There's going to be, I know this may not be intuitive, but to do this, you just design the shape, you have it printed, and you just bond it in with some cement. Like there's really not much lab work to it. If you're going to do it with Trilor, you're going to have to do a bunch of manual shaping of that Trilor. You're going to have to manually punch your holes. You're going to have to prime it, bond it into place, and then you're going to have to encase it. I just don't have to do any of that with this method. Was that all the
Okay.
questions on that?
The next comment is you're the man.
I'm the man. I appreciate it. All right. So let's see here. This is just another similar case. Only difference here being that, there's still some teeth present. So you could do an initial fixation guide to put your pins in place. Sorry, this is jumping ahead. All right, there we go. So here is the bone reduction guide in place. This time we got 8, so 16 total magnets. So you're almost looking at 16 pounds of retention between these. But you can see the accurate reduction guide. How am I getting this model again? Because if you'll notice on this model, I've not only got accurate sockets where those teeth are extracted, but if you look like right there, that's one of my implant sites. So how am I getting all of that? Well, you get the sockets from the blue sky segmentation, because it's all automatically subtracting out the tooth root spaces. But then to get the implant sites, I'm just exporting my implants and subtracting them from this model. All right, so now you got a true to life model that you can print, do a mock surgery on, try all your guides and everything on. It's just a wise thing to do if you're going to do these cases. Here's the magnetic drill guide. Once again, using this cradle bar temp method, you can see I've just got a 3D printed temp out of a crown and bridge resin. I think this one was out of Rodin Sculpture. I did this one most recently. It's the only reason I remember it. Once again, just a few pegs to index this in place. It is actually more, it's easier to get this thing to its mirror finish before you bond this on, because I remembered on that last case when I was doing that after it had been bonded, you get a lot of the little metal shavings all over it and you kind of create some dark spots in your temp. So get the intaglio of this to a high mirror finish before you bond it on, and leave the underside here, the bonding interface, leave it rough, and then just bond them together. And now again, you've got a highly polished intaglio that the tissue is going to love and that will go on to your magnetic base. Again, this is how it goes on to the reduction guide. It's going to index into the magnetic interface here, and we've got these large pickup holes. And you can actually afford to make your pickup holes bigger when you use metal, because it doesn't take much thickness of chrome cobalt to have an ultra stiff, stable reinforcement. And then just one other addition here. I do find it difficult if we go back to this image. So imagine these are your cylinders. It can be really difficult to get your dual cure pickup material in between your cylinder and this and squirt it from the occlusal aspect. So what I'll oftentimes do is create injection holes on the facial. All right, so there we see at each implant site, and you can see them from the internal here, that's an injection hole that corresponds to right. So what this lets you do is, instead of trying to put it in between your cylinder and your temp, you literally just stick the tip in there of your dual cure and you start injecting, and it gives you some hydraulic pressure, so you actually get a denser fill around your cylinder. Just make sure that you've got some kind of block out underneath it, rubber dam, whatever, a gasket, so that you don't drive material down and lock this thing on around your multis, because believe me, that's a mistake you'll make once in your life. That is not a fun day if you lock one of these temps in the mouth. So use some kind of a gasket just to prevent that. But now you can just use hydraulic pressure, and you can just pump that dual cure material in until you've fully surrounded your cylinder, and then go to the next one, pump this one, and it's much easier access all the way around. Oh, and this was one other little trick I do. So in the process of creating these temps, this started out as just a denture quote that I had designed in BlueSkyPlan, just use the denture module. It's sitting up 3 millimeters off the bone, but it doesn't have any pickup holes in it. All right. So I always save that file and export it before I make the pickup holes. All right. Just so I've got it, and you'll see why in just a second. And then to make your pickup holes, just export some 5 or 6 millimeter diameter custom abutments. Now you've got your pickup holes. The downside to having a larger pickup hole, though, is that now you've got these big holes that you're going to have to patch up and fill with composite back to the original anatomy, which, depending on your freehand composite skills, is not the easiest thing to do. So again, here's a simple trick. The one that you saved prior to making your pickup holes, in fact, prior to even adding your stackable interfaces, I print ones and I just do a suck down on it. And the reason I do that is because now, let's say that we've picked everything up, our cylinders are embedded, we've delivered this in the mouth, all these little magnetic interfaces are cut off. Now I just need to close us in the patient home. Okay, well, great. Instead of me sitting there trying to freehand the anatomy and build it up perfectly, I'll put this little suck down on, poke one little hole in there, and I'm just going to injection mold the composite. So as you inject that composite in, obviously have something to close your screw access hole, Teflon tape, silly putty, whatever. But now I can just inject composite or dual cure material through this and fill it all the way up and light cure through it. And now I've got perfect pre-op anatomy. It won't look like a big patched up mess like most immediate conversions look like. It will have perfect anatomy on it. All right, so just another quick little trick. Any questions at the moment?
No additional questions.
All right, I'm debating, do I want to show something else? What am I, an hour and 10 minutes in right now?
No, an hour and 40 minutes in.
Oh, an hour and 40. Dang, I thought I was actually ahead of schedule. All right, I'm gonna show one last case and I'll call it quits. All right, this is a case I did with Dr. Zickman, who's he's an oral surgeon and one of the owners of BlueSkyPlan or BlueSky Bio. And so this patient, again, teeth are not doing great. She's got a lot of big spaces. She's losing some due to perio. All right, so again, the foundation to doing every single one of these cases that I've shown you is bone segmentation. And again, I can't stress enough, if you are a D4 student and you come out of school here in a couple of weeks and start doing guided surgery, and you just get to jump straight into having bone segmented for by one button, I can't tell you how much I hate you for how easy your life is. I feel like you ought to go through the hazing of having to do manual segmentation for 3 years before you get to enjoy this feature, because God, it's a nightmare if you had to do this manually. All right, but we don't anymore. We punch a button, Blue Sky segments everything perfectly, and now you have jawbone models. And so same methods I've been showing, we're going to create reduction, drill guides, all that kind of stuff. So if you are going to do these full arches, one thing to be aware of, we're used to in a regular tooth-borne guide doing our CT scan with the occlusion apart. And that's what you should do, because when you go to stitch in your intraoral scan STL, if the teeth are all in occlusion, it's going to struggle with that stitch. Now it's getting better with the newest updates, but it'll still struggle more. So do your tooth-borne cases with the occlusions separated, cotton roll, bite stick, whatever in between them. In full arch cases, especially if you're doing upper and lower arches, I can't stress to you how important it is that you need to take your CT with the patient in occlusion at the VDO where you want to restore them. All right, so it's not just in occlusion. If you got a patient who has beat their teeth down and their incisors are 4 millimeters tall and they're overclosed, don't put that patient in full occlusion. Use a leaf gauge or something and open them to the right VDO, but you want to take your CT scan at the right VDO in occlusion, okay? So the reason for that is you don't know where to set teeth to. You'll be able to set them to the maxillary arch, but you don't know where to position the opposing arch of teeth to as you're doing your wax up. And it's going to create a ton more work for you. So just take my word for it and just do them in occlusion at the correct VDO. All right, segmentation. Now this older case, this one was actually segmented by Diagnocat, but it's the same principles. Again, you're going to use the AI, and that's going to generate your segmentation of your teeth and the bone. So here's the game plan. This patient needed all her maxillary teeth removed and these 4 lower anteriors removed. All right. One of the things I'll do sometimes when I'm trying to do my 3D wax up, yes, I've already got the simulation, but I'll even go so far as to bring in this little crosshairs planes, and I'll orient this to the ideal occlusal plane and this through the facial midline. It's just one more step that makes it where it's virtually impossible to get off with my digital wax up. All right. So here you can see this makes it like setting dentures back in dental school. You're just setting them to this plane. All right. We're going to position all our implants prosthetically minded. So why am I this deep in the bone? Well, because a hybrid is what was requested by the restoring doctor. And if I want to do a hybrid, I need 16 millimeters of space. That's where that puts the implants, is up deeper into the maxilla. And that's usually going to be the case in a hybrid restoration. Unless they've been edentulous for a good while, you're going to have to do significant bone reduction. Now, I'm not here to start the argument over should we be doing as much bone reduction. I mean, frankly, if it's my own mouth, I would prefer to have an FP1 restoration if the bone is available. And I know people get really worked up over that whole argument. It's not what I'm trying to argue for or against right now. I would go FP1 if possible, but that's not what was done here. We did a hybrid. So here's the implant positions, again, based off of the prosthetic space required for a hybrid. Okay, and then we strategically position the pins in between them. All right, now you'll notice here I've done these 3 pins in the front parallel to one another. And this is something I typically do with almost all my stackable cases, is I actually make those 3 parallel pins where they're not removable. They're actually part of the reduction guide. Okay, do you see this? And the reason for that is that it gives me some more flexibility. One, it makes the guide more stable because you don't have any wiggle between these anterior pins and the reduction guide. But secondly, I can position this and put in the reduction guide before I do extractions, but I could also do it after. Doing it after extractions is oftentimes a really valuable tool especially if you can't strategically place implants to avoid roots. You know, if you got to drill through a tooth root, that's not fun and it's not good on your drills. So the idea would be that you're just going to use a normal resin printed guide and drill all 5 pinholes before you extract any teeth. But after that, you can do all your extractions. And once they're out of the way, this thing will slide in and it will self-orient on these 3 parallel anterior pins. Slides all the way up against the buccal bone, and then you've just got 2 posterior pins to drop in. All right. So this is showing the resin guide that's just for drilling your pinholes. And then here is the reduction guide. So everything below this, that's going to be cut off. All right. Put the magnets in. If you're ever doing these, I get the magnets from Apex Magnets. And this just kind of shows the way this thing seats itself. You would just slide it into the holes, which are already there. And when it bottoms out against the buccal bone, it's in place and you should be able to drop these 2 distal pins in. All right. So there's the reduction guide. I kind of was just experimenting with the different guide design here. So I actually made it where it's all metal on the top and you actually slide your magnets in from the apical. So they're actually fully encased within the metal. That's cool to do. It's a little more effort, but it's neither here nor there. Here's the drill guide. Here's how they all stack up. So after you've reduced the bone down, you can throw on this reduction guide. I'm sorry, the drill guide. And again, you see the little peg that orients it. The magnets are just for retention. It's the tripod of male-female pegs that actually keeps the position there. Okay, so, and we also, anytime you've got a disto-angulated implant or anything that's not going to use a straight multi, then you're going to have to build in a timing mark so that you can ensure that your implant position ends up at the exact same degree of rotation as what it was in the software. So you can see I've created 3 timing marks on my drill guide, and each of those corresponds to one of the flats of the Biomax implant here. Okay. So that just tells Albert when he goes and screws these in and he bottoms out at depth, he just needs to make sure one of the flats is aligned to right there. So maybe a 10 to 15 degree turn to get that lined up and you'll be good. And then finally, here is the stacked hybrid. All right, again, 3 millimeters off the bone. Now, one thing I haven't shown is oftentimes, even though your multis are relatively parallel, they still have some divergence. 26 degrees if you're looking from the frontal, 23 degrees if you're looking from the lateral. So if you just make a dead zero hole, there's a chance that it might not drop on top of these. You know, you might have to pick up, say, these 2, and then these 2, and then these 2 kind of in separate pickups. So something I'll do is I'll actually build in a path of draw over the top of all of these at once. And then that is what I subtract for my holes. So the way I do that is I hack the denture module. I'm going to just tell it to set my insertion direction from a particular view where I'm looking down over all of those abutments. And the first step of the denture fabrication process is to create the blockout model. So I'll tell it, don't allow any blockouts. And I get this. All right. So now this has space subtracted out so that I can see my restoration over all of those cylinders, despite the fact that they're divergent. All right. Here it is subtracted, and you can see that that ends up having some elongated holes and spots, and that's fine. We're trying to make life easier on ourselves and not have to do a lot of adjusting or do multiple pickups. All right, that's how it all stacks together. This is Oral Arts logo if you need them there in Huntsville, Alabama. This is one that's been chrome plated, and so that's just kind of how the difference would look. Again, printed models to verify the fit of everything. These are direct from BlueSkyPlan with the sockets and then just the implant sites subtracted out from them, all from that segmentation software. And then I actually used the denture module to design a flipper. Okay, and this flipper I 3D printed in uh, Flexera resin, obviously, because it's flexible, right? So Flexera teeth white and Flexera base pink, bonded them together, and now I have a flexible partial. And I really like doing these. They actually, to me, I like them better than a, say, a Valplast or a Duraflex or something. They're much easier to adjust on without looking all ratty and creating those burred up heat marks. They're obviously almost free to make. So anyway, I really like these. That's a good resin to try if you want to make those. All right, this is what it all looks like together. So surgically, we're going to put on the pin guide, make sure it's fully seated. That's incredibly important. And then you're going to drill all 5 pinholes to spot them out. And now he can just take the teeth out without a guide in the way. All right, so that's one benefit of doing it with these built-in pins. Seat this, it's going to slide in along those 3 parallel pins until it bottoms out on the buccal bone, and then reduce the bone down to that level. Now your drill guide can go on. This is for the Blue Sky fully guided keyless kit. And then Albert placed the multi-1 implants, which should probably mention, if you're doing full arch cases, look into these because they're a 1-piece implant, which means they're really strong. You don't have to worry about stripping an abutment screw or something like that. These are really strong implants. They've got a great thread pattern and they bite really well, and they come in straight 17 and 30 degree, but the multi's already built in. So you can actually save a good bit of money because you're not buying independent parts. You know, you're not buying the implant and then the multi, and then like your implant and your multis all in one. And the only thing you need to be careful of these long range is that you don't want to strip the screw that goes into the top of the multi here. So just be mindful as you're placing those to, if it feels like it's cross threaded and you're continuing to screw in, you might end up screwing up your threading. It ought to go in nice and passive, like any screw should go in. But aside from that, I see no downside to these things. And they really are stronger and they can save you a lot of money. Plus you don't have an implant to abutment interface, and you know that's better for bone health and that. So Albert put in the implants, and now he's put on his temp cylinders, and that's what you want to see, is that the temp cylinders are coming through the hole in the temp. You can see rubber dam underneath it so he doesn't lock anything on, and he picks that up. Once he picks this up, he can undo his temp cylinder screw, take all of this out of the mouth, and all he's got to do is cut off the magnetic interface on each side, fill in any little voids he might have in the occlusal surface, which is easier if you have one of those suck downs like I was talking about. And you've got a fully finished hybrid that's exactly contoured, but 3 millimeters off the bone. And this was that patient when she bit down for the first time. So that really speaks to the accuracy of this process, is that's her occlusion right out of the gate. Now, going back to my argument earlier, if you have gone to the trouble of putting metal reinforcement into this where it's going to be super strong, or maybe you fiber reinforced it or Trilor or whatever, if you nailed the aesthetics with this, tell me why, if it has reinforcement, this couldn't be the final. And you won't be able to think of a reason because this can absolutely serve as the final. So if you take away one thing from me today, well, 3 things. This auto segmentation is incredible. It's going to save you mountains of time in all your planning of any kind of bone supported case, or where you just need to use the tooth roots to create extraction sockets or whatever. Secondly, start doing 2D simulations. It's going to make a ton of money for you because you're going to sell a lot more dentistry, but it's going to make your cases more accurate by helping determine where exactly to do wax ups. And then the third thing to take away from me today is think outside of the box at ways that you can help your patients and get them restored to fixed teeth without having to mortgage their house to do it. There's so many options out there. The implants are already about as inexpensive as they'll ever get. It's the restorative side where we need to think outside the box. And these printed restorations with a reinforcing substructure are an excellent way to go. Very few modes of failure. The worst that can happen is they chip some teeth and you just fix it in the mouth. So that was her final result. And I'm going to stop with that. And at least I did stay under 2 hours, Michael.
Okay, very good. So first of all, this webinar presentation is being recorded because I know it's tons of information. And if you want to go back and watch it slowly in slow motion, or if you missed part of it, or if you want to share it with somebody else, so go ahead and you could watch the recording. We're going to have the recording also available besides being on YouTube. We'll have a link on blueskybio.university/webinars. That's where you could see the past recordings and as well the future upcoming presentations. So you could go ahead and register for that presentation. While I'm talking, if anybody has questions they want to enter into the chat box, questions and answers, now is a great time to do it before we wrap things up. Regarding the CE credits, so we'll be sending those via email, usually within around a week or so. Check your inbox. All webinar presentations are available at no charge, and we issue 1 CE credit for attending the presentation live. I think that pretty much wraps up the webinar.
Michael, there was one question that you could answer, but the question was, will Blue Sky segment the face? Now I know as of today it doesn't, but is that something in the long range plans to do where if you've taken a big field of view volume that it will segment the face tissue as well?
It's not something that we're currently working on. I have to give it some thought. There's actually a very good video in the Facebook group. I don't recall the doctor's name. I think he's located somewhere in Iraq, maybe. He showed a presentation where he created a video showing the CT scan with the face. He cut out the area of the mouth and he had his denture set up there. So it's a bit rudimentary, but it's actually, I was quite surprised by how good it looked.
Yeah.
Regarding development, we don't currently have that in our pipeline to segment the face.
Well, we'll talk after this, but one thing I was going to throw in is, this CT, unfortunately, that I actually have pulled up is pretty small volume, so I can't really do it. But if you've taken a large field of view CT that has the facial tissue, you can actually go down here, and granted, it's not an automated workflow, but you can play with this density. And this is all intraoral tissue, which is why it's showing like that. But in such a circumstance, you can actually take the density way down here and the soft tissue will show up. And once you've got clear soft tissue, go here and hit create model. And now you have an STL of the skin. So I would think, Michael, that's probably something we could automate pretty easily if we just got to put it in the development pipeline. So, but this is the only piece of soft tissue that's showing, but do you see how the nose, the inside of the nostrils and everything, this is all soft tissue. Do you see how that renders really nicely? So just play with your slider until that renders and then hit create model, and there's your soft tissue scan.
So first of all, a couple of things. I want to plug the Facebook group, because the Facebook group, if you're not part of it, that is a very valuable resource and asset. And there are great videos there regarding things that we're talking about. But second of all, another comment is I'm seeing more and more the face scans, the full color face scans that are becoming more and more popular. It could be done today with cell phones. There's iOS apps and Android apps, and also there are discussions in the Facebook group about that. There's a fantastic company, Rayface, that has the Rayface face scan as well, and they could actually transfer the CT together with the aligned face into BlueSkyPlan. And BlueSkyPlan has its own functionality as well to do the alignment between a full color face scan as well to the models, to the upper and lower models. So that's already existing in BlueSkyPlan. A lot of people are taking advantage of it. I saw some fantastic applications of it in ortho as well to have the face imported. So we have all that functionality exists in BlueSkyPlan today. You could use it in surgical guides, you could use it in orthodontics, a lot of different applications. So yeah.
Let me throw one caveat in there though. I do find the facial scans to be extremely helpful, but I know you can get on and buy like these $300 scanners or some of the cell phone ones. Those are only going to be useful in as much as the accuracy is detailed enough that you can then stitch it back to your case in BlueSkyPlan. So for example, if you use a cheap scanner and it's not detailed enough to capture the contours of the teeth, now you have no bridge or way to stitch it back to your intraoral scans. And frankly, a poorly stitched facial scan that that isn't perfectly lined up is more damaging than helpful. Because now you're doing stuff, you're planning it based on a facial midline. You don't even know if it's in there right. So that's one thing I will say about a CT generated facial scan, we'll call it. I mean, like what I was just talking about, take a large field of view, just adjust the density until skin shows up. The thing about that, it's already stitched in place. So I actually, the docs I work with who use one of those, I've had them start, again, take their full mouth CT in occlusion at the correct VDO, but I'm even taking it a step further and asking them to have the patient smiling during their CT scan. Because if you do that, now you're going to end up with a smiling STL of the patient's entire face. Now, granted, it won't have color, but from a treatment planning perspective, you don't need color. You just need facial contours to see the planes. And I know a lot of people are using the 3D facial scans for treatment planning presentation. And I would bet they're losing more cases than they're gaining, because those things look terrifying. I don't care which scanner it is and how good. When you start rotating that head around, it never looks quite right. There's something about it that looks like a corpse. So I don't think that's valuable personally from a treatment presentation standpoint. In my opinion, you're far, far better off, and you make a greater impact on the patient to have a 2D simulation like this, because then it's photorealistic and they don't look like a corpse like they usually do on the 3D scans. So take that for what it's worth. But if you've got a big enough CT scan to pull that off, try it. Just have the patient smiling in occlusion while you take your CT.
Okay, I'll just comment regarding gray face. I think one of the things that they excel at is the alignment of the face scan to the CT, and they could transfer that to BlueSkyPlan, and then of course you could align the models to that. So then I think you'll get everything aligned very accurately. Also with the new updates in ortho to segment the teeth as well, so it combines everything very nicely together. So yeah, definitely everyone should be a bit cautious with that, but I think technology is improving, that it's getting better and better. So Jason Larkin is commenting, Dr. Jason Larkin, spray face with contrast pattern during CBCT scan maybe, or using an intraoral scan to do the face scan with dot stickers on the face. Okay, so those are suggestions as well.
The spraying their face with powder is a tough sell, especially for females with makeup on, as you might guess. I have tried to do the intraoral scanning of the face. In fact, I've often argued that you don't need the whole face. You really need button of the chin, the teeth, and up to the bridge of the nose. And that's going to be enough to set your midline. I don't know if it's changed, but what I ran into that made that problematic is that now the scanners are smart enough that they know we're looking for teeth. So even though I captured it all in my scan, when I then processed my scan, it cut all that out because it saw it as extraneous data. So I was requesting a couple of the companies, hey, just give us like a free scan mode where whatever it captures, it keeps, and you don't end up rendering it away. But I don't know if that's been done. So something you might experiment with the various intraoral scanners.
Okay. So that's it. So I'd like to thank everybody so much for attending. Check out our schedule for future webinars and past webinars, blueskybio.university/webinars. Cory, thank you so much for all the educational content that you create and for today's webinar presentation. It's really a contribution, I think, to the world, to society, both to the patients and to the dentists.
Thank you
very, very much. And everybody, thank you so much for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a good one.
Okay, so we're still live, so people can hear us, but recording's over. So Cory, fantastic as always.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll get back with you about some of that stuff on the facial thing, because I think if I find some sample cases, I can do a few for you, but I think that would be easy to put in the pipeline.
Okay, I also saw some videos on the Facebook group about segmenting the airways.
Yeah, I've done that the same way as well.
Yeah.
In fact, I've
Okay.
got an old YouTube video of it I could send you. But that actually is the easiest of all of them, because the airway is the only thing in the entire case that shows up as stark black. Like any place there's air, it's going to be completely black. So you're almost just inverting what you're segmenting, but you're selecting for all the black as opposed to the various zillion shades of gray. So that should be easy to add to the pipeline.
Okay. Is that the click of a button in Mesh Mixer?
No, it's not done. So the way I'm doing it currently in BlueSkyPlan is that I'm adjusting the density where basically I end up with a solid model like I was doing with the face. And what's left that's not a solid piece is all the airway. So then I just export it. And then in Mesh Mixer, I just take a giant cube and I subtract that. And what's left behind is airway. Now, DiagnoCat does currently do the airways for you. It's hit or miss sometimes, I found, but it does do that. But that would be something I know a lot of people ask about that do sleep, dentistry stuff. So maybe something to consider as well. It's the same functionality as what you're doing for the face. If you can zero it out where everything is solid except air, well, what's outside the face is air. So there's your face.
Right. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
all right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. See you.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.